My name is Kelly. I've always worked hard to prove my worth, but nothing was ever good enough for my mother. This year I turned 35, and I thought things might change. But one summer afternoon, everything came crashing down. I was called into the president's office, my mother's office. The moment I walked in, I knew something was wrong. She was sitting there, fanning herself, barely looking at me. And then, with a cold stare, she said the words that would change my life forever. "I'm giving the company to Samantha. You're fired. Pack your things." At first, I couldn't process it. My mind went blank. The sunlight streaming through the window made everything feel unreal. My heart pounded in my chest as I stood there, trying to understand what had just happened. I thought maybe I had misunderstood, but when I opened my mouth to speak, my voice felt weak. "What do you mean, fired?" I stammered. My mother didn't answer directly. Instead, she looked at me as if I were a nuisance. "I said you're fired. We don't need you anymore. Move out by the end of the month." Her words hit me like a slap to the face. For so many years, I had given my all to this company, to my family. And now, just like that, it was over. My mother turned away and went back to her work, ignoring me completely. It was as if I didn't matter. Slowly, I backed out of the office, feeling a strange numbness spread through me. The sound of cicadas outside filled the silence. How could she do this to me? After everything, she was choosing Samantha, the one who barely cared about the company. I worked at the family company for over a decade, doing everything from accounting to sales. It was always expected of me. Samantha, my younger sister, was supposed to take over one day, but she never really cared about the business. She was always getting bored of jobs and quitting, complaining that nothing suited her. Meanwhile, I stayed, doing everything asked of me without question. I worked late nights, took on tasks no one else wanted, and kept the company running. But no matter what I did, it was never enough to make my mother proud. Samantha had always been the golden child. She was beautiful, and my mother adored her for it. I wasn't bad-looking, but I never got the same attention. Growing up, Samantha received gifts and praise for just being her. I was the one who worked hard, but I was always in the background. I wore hand-me-downs and did the chores. My mother never showed much interest in me unless I was helping with something. She was always too busy with Samantha, the perfect daughter. I wanted her approval so badly, but it felt like I was invisible. I remember one time when I was in high school, my aunt sat me down and told me the truth. She said, "Your father didn't just die. He ran off with another woman. She was older than your mom, and she looked like you." I was stunned. My mother had never told me the full story. I had always been told that my father had passed away, but now I understood why my mother never loved me the way she loved Samantha. She couldn't forgive my father for leaving her for someone who looked like me. The years passed, and I kept working, day in and day out. I never asked for much, just some recognition, maybe a kind word from my mother, but it never came. When I turned 25, my mother practically dragged me into the family business. "We have no accountant," she had said. "What, are you going to leave us in trouble? You'll be the one who suffers." It wasn't a choice. She had made it for me. I didn't want to disappoint anyone, so I joined the company. And from that moment, my life became a never-ending cycle of work. I could see it all unraveling. The company was struggling, costs were rising, and the industry was shifting. I knew we couldn't keep going like this, but my mother refused to listen. She had always relied on her looks to get by, attracting clients with her charm. But even that wasn't enough anymore. As the business struggled, she decided to hand over the company to Samantha. My sister had barely worked here for 2 years, and now, suddenly, she was being made the president. I had worked here for over 10 years, but to my mother, it didn't matter. I was out. It was a slap in the face. I didn't even have time to process it before she was already moving forward. My mother told me to pack up, leave, and be gone by the end of the month. She said it so matter-of-factly, like it was the most normal thing in the world. I stood there, in that cold office, feeling completely lost. The company I had poured my heart into was now in the hands of someone who didn't care about it. Samantha didn't have the skills or experience, but my mother didn't care. She was blinded by her beauty. I spent the next few weeks preparing everything for the handover. I had to make sure Samantha could understand everything. But I knew she wouldn't. She never did. She was too busy with her own life to pay attention to the details. My aunt, always the observer, was shocked by my firing, but she understood why it happened. "Samantha doesn't like it when people rely on you," she told me. "She feels you're in her way." It was the truth. Samantha couldn't handle the pressure, and my mother couldn't see it. But I had been discarded like yesterday's news. As the days passed, I started to feel a strange sense of freedom. My phone rang nonstop with calls from my mother, but I ignored them. I didn't want to hear her voice, begging me to come back. I had been trapped in her control for so long, and now, for the first time, I was free. But the more I ignored her calls, the more desperate they became. It was like she couldn't accept that I had finally broken free. She kept calling, sending messages, but I didn't care anymore. I was done. I was done with her manipulation. A year passed, and I had built a new life for myself. I worked at a new job, one where my abilities were appreciated. I had made new friends, and for the first time in years, I felt like I belonged. But then, one day, I passed by my mother's old company. The windows were dirty, and the plants I had once taken care of were withered. I didn't want to stop, but I couldn't help myself. And then I saw her. She was coming out of the building, looking like a ghost of her former self. She spotted me and smiled. She approached me, and I felt a mix of anger and disgust. "Kelly, where have you been?" she asked, as if everything were fine. It was like nothing had changed, and she didn't even realize how much she had hurt me. I wanted to scream at her, to tell her how much she had destroyed my life. But I stayed calm. "I'm working at another company now, Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But she didn't listen. Instead, she said, "Come back to the company. It's a mess without you." She thought I would return, just like that. It was then that I finally understood. She didn't care about me. She never had. She only cared about the image of having a perfect family, and I was just a tool to help her maintain that. She wanted me back to fix her mess, but I wasn't going to be her scapegoat anymore. "What about Samantha?" I asked, trying to keep my voice from shaking. My mother scoffed. "She messed up. I thought she'd be more useful, but she failed. Now, it's your turn." She wasn't sorry. She was desperate, and that was when I realized I would never go back. I could see the shock on my mother's face as I refused her offer. The crowd that had gathered began whispering. People were recording the scene, and I didn't care. I had spent so many years trying to earn her love and approval, and now I saw it for what it was: manipulation. As my mother's anger grew, the truth spilled out. "It's your fault for being ugly," she yelled in front of everyone. The crowd went silent, shocked by her cruelty. It was the final blow, and just like that, my mother's reputation crumbled in front of her. The video of my mother's outburst spread quickly, and the clients who had once supported her began to pull away. They couldn't trust her anymore, and soon the company was on the verge of bankruptcy. I wasn't surprised. I had seen it coming. Samantha, too, fell from grace. She couldn't rely on her beauty to fix things anymore. As for me, I moved on. I found happiness in a new job, surrounded by people who respected me, and I never looked back. My mother and sister were left to face the consequences of their actions, while I moved forward into a new life.